So yesterday we basically left off with deciding that we're dropping claim equality in the model for now and postpone that decision, because we said that in a perfect model, like with perfect data entry, you don't need claim equivalence because things would already be merged. And if we decide on how this merged model looks like, then later on we can decide on how the in progress model can look like. That was the way of thinking we had yesterday. Any comments?
Well, that's just registering my objection, but it's okay. It's a model.
Yeah, right. So it's basically just a matter of priorities. What are we focusing on first? So in that sense, we removed the equality relation from both models, and this came out, like the support in the claim. And in my opinion, I think we should focus on disambiguation aspects, like interpretation of sentences, like this sentence can be interpreted as these two claims, this kind of stuff. What do you think?
I think that's perfectly appropriate, yes.
Okay, so and yesterday Tim made the example of Paris is nice. And then the question is, okay, which kind of Paris are we talking about? Is it the city in France? And there's one in Texas, I think. Tim mentioned that one.
Yes, there's one in Texas.
Yeah.
Paris, Texas, and there was something else again. Yeah, Paris as in the Greek hero.
Yeah, right. So
in Texas, there's a town for almost every city in the world. Just so you know.
Okay.
It's a way to name towns.
Yeah, and we say them different, you know, and instead of Nevada, we call it Nevada. So we pronounce it differently. I don't think about Paris. I think we pronounce the same way. It's a thing.
Well, yes. I'm still there's always the Vancouver, Seattle that amuses me to no end. And not Vancouver, Seattle is in, sorry, Washington? Yeah, Vancouver, Washington.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think that's a good example to model.
Yeah.
So we can, yes.
Yeah, and this is, I will argue while I'm at it that this is where the symbol in context thing is relevant, and I'd rather have symbols in context rather than strings. It's impossible to attach a provenance to a string, or not unless it's taken out, which is what I did.
How would that affect the model in this way? If for this simple example, like Paris is nice.
What would happen is you'd have different Paris is nice. So you'd have the one taken from this document, that document, where each time it's taken in a different context. Let me disable this. And the context allows you to say which one of the different interpretations of Paris is active at a given moment.
But if only a person said it, is that also—
That's a context too?
Okay, that's still a document in your understanding, right?
Yeah, it's a very broad definition of document here.
Yeah.
I said usually text could be media in the comments here, because I'm assuming we have a recording of that. If the person said it. No, of course not.
Okay, so you're basically arguing we cannot do the disambiguation without context, right?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, the decontextualized symbol is another reality, and it's fine. And sometimes we will use those. But I'm saying most of the time when we interpret a sentence, we use the context, and it's relevant to use the context because the context reveal meanings that one wouldn't think about. And the Paris Greek hero was actually a great example. I mean, everybody thinks of Paris, Texas, and I would not have thought of the Paris Greek hero. And having access to the context is what gives me this new interpretation.
Yeah, hi guys. Sorry I was late.
Hi Tim, no worries.
I mean, my opinion on that is, again, is of course you could do that without the context, because you can just enumerate every possibility, or you can just enumerate the possibilities that matter to you. The context is the people that are going to see this and contribute to the debate. So if nobody there cares about Paris, the Greek figure, then they won't go down that route. They won't create a version of the claim that's disambiguated to talk about the hero, and that's enough.
And this is valid. If there's a context where nobody cares about it, adding it is spurious. But on the other hand, it is the presence of a context that allows you to have an interpretation. And if you don't have, when the case does arise that we're speaking about the Greek hero, well, it's the context that gives us that.
I just want to jump in and say that if there is not any type of disambiguation that gives more precise meaning to entities in a claim, that could potentially lead to lots of misinterpretations. And that's going to create like a messy collective response. Because you can see this live happening in conversations in social media, is that people start arguing at and around each other because they've misunderstood some implication of a particular claim that was stated. So just for the purpose of like keeping a clean, more like dialectical debate map, there could be a feature or a flag or something that calls for disambiguation, because otherwise you guys are probably going to increase the surface area of argumentation that may make it more messy than it needs to be.
Just for the record, I'm with you totally, but I'll play devil's advocate 2 seconds. The point is, can this disambiguation element, this interpretation element, be detached from provenance? Can we?
Be detached.
Yes, absolutely can. Absolutely can.
And is it
if
a good
I
idea
say
to do so?
Sure. If I say what was it? I like Paris. What was the
Paris
the
is nice.
example?
Paris is nice.
Paris is nice. And I can just say, okay, we're going to talk about Paris, the Greek figure. And obviously the arguments are relevant if they're about his actions, right? I've done it without doing anything with the original phrase or what context it came in. It doesn't change the debate. You can totally argue that without knowing where that phrase came from. If you've disambiguated and said it's Paris, the Greek figure, go. You can do that. You don't need the original book reference where that sentence was stated.
I would argue that even the reading of nice would depend on context.
I fully agree with that too, but you could further disambiguate and say he is kind to other people
and what
that
I'm
he
saying,
doesn't
no,
know, right? But
I will actually counter that I can ambiguate without context, but I cannot disambiguate without context. I can find that there's all these possible meanings, but I don't
context. No, okay. I would reply to that by saying, no, what you're saying is that context is a looser form of disambiguation. It creates the first boundary around which you're disambiguating, and from there you can disambiguate further.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely true. And what I'm saying is, by losing context, we lose the ability to disambiguate.
You
I
lose
disagree
the
as
first
well.
handle. Yeah, you lose the shortcut of disambiguation, which is, oh, it came from this book, right, or whatever. What you're really losing is the why are you having this debate, right? You're not disambiguating what is meant by the sentence. You're disambiguating why are we even talking about this, right?
No, I even
that,
disagree with that. I disagree with that.
Let's go back to some like a claim you made, and let's try to
do
argue
you
why
know?
Timothy and I disagree with that. You say that without context, you lose the ability to disambiguate. It's like saying Paris is nice. You don't know where or why that was stated. You can no longer disambiguate between different claims, interpretations of that, saying, well, one possible interpretation is Paris is city, the other is Paris in Texas, the other is Paris in France. You can. That is disambiguation right there. So
How do you do it? If
Can-
if the
can I-
sentence floats in vacuum, how do you do it? How do you know?
No,
which
Just
then you
like
have
we said right now.
disambiguation definitions. You have definitions.
yeah,
That's
you
one
say there's
approach
two
to do it.
different disambiguations from this one common. That is the act of disambiguating.
No, but how? Okay, there's two
Your question is
operations.
how do you know which is the right one? But both are correct.
No, that okay. This is, I would call that ambiguation, saying that there's more than one possible interpretation, and disambiguation is choosing one. And what I'm saying is, without context, you cannot disambiguate. You can ambiguate, fair enough.
You can, but what you're saying is without context, you don't know which specific disambiguation was the one intended in the original context. What Timothy and I are saying is you can say in many different contexts, either one or the other may be used, but you decouple
again,
it from context.
you're supposing a finished, complete set of disambiguation. Now, suppose I come around, and this is I'll try to make this a realistic example.
I don't think we do.
Let
Okay.
me let me okay, you identifies these three pairs, okay? In this case, it's the Greek hero. And then I come and I want to know, what do you mean by nice? Is it nice as was understood by Homer? Or is it nice as understood by modern sensibilities? Which are two very different arguments, because ethics and values change wholly between Homer's time and ours. And so I would need, but this is not something I've thought about initially. I've only disambiguated Paris. I haven't disambiguated nice. It's later in discussion that I discovered the need to do that. And if I've lost the link to the original, I don't know what I mean. Disambiguations come later. Ambiguity
The same
comes
argument
later.
than before
discovered.
applies. You can
No,
just
no, you assume it's been done. I'm saying if it's not been done yet and we discover a new ambiguity later, which happens all the time.
no. I assume
okay,
it's
but-
ambiguous.
And this
I
is
don't
exactly
assume
the
it's
point I was going to
disambiguous, I
bring
assume
up.
it's ambiguous.
Yeah, this is exactly the point I was going to bring up with Jamie, which is, in fact, what we've discovered through these discussions is one of the heuristics you can use to find out if you need disambiguation is when people are evaluating the relevance of arguments and you find wild variation in relevance, right? Because if you say, the argument Paris looks lovely in spring, people who think you're talking about the Greek person are gonna be like, what? Totally irrelevant. And people who, think you're talking about the city in France are going to rate that as highly relevant. When you get a wide swing, like you said, of opening too much the range of understandings and opinions, you start getting arguments that some interpret as relevant and others interpret as irrelevant. And that is a signal that you need to disambiguate some more, right? Break this up into two discussions.
Okay, let's go a bit beyond relevance, if you'll allow me. If I say Paris killed his prisoner, it is obviously relevant to whether he's nice or not, but it's actually a pro in Homer and a con in modern sensibilities.
Right, but so you would get arguments in support or against whether that was a relevant argument.
No, I'm saying it's relevant in both cases, but it changes the orientation.
Well, yeah, and that's a separate question, which is how do you handle ambiguous, I don't know if that's the right word, or double-edged arguments, right? That the one I gave before was like Trump is a great president because he tried to build a wall, right? Well, it depends on how you feel about the wall. And in that case, you can actually break that down more into a little more because, in that case, you have to evolve the arguments a little better. Trump's because he tried to stop the influx of illegal immigrants, which are taking whatever. But the point is, you can have arguments that are double-edged like that. And my preference would be to split that into two arguments, one pro, one con, which is Paris killed his prisoner. Well, that doesn't sound nice in any sense. It sounds like he's a good leader or whatever. Nobody would say that's nice. He's nice because yeah. Let's put it this way. What is it? What's the guy from?
It's great. The question is Paris is great.
But let's the Simon Cowell or whatever from American Idol, X Factor, whatever, right? Is nice because he tells people to their face they have no hope of being a star, right? Well, how is that nice? Well, some people interpret that as being nice because he truly cares about them and is telling them the truth before they waste a lot of time on it. And other people are thinking that's mean because he's hurting their feelings, right? Okay, I would handle that by two separate arguments, which is he tells them to their face they have no future, and that prevents them from further hurt. So there's an and there. In other words, it ends up being kind of a multi-premise argument. You need to flesh out, because you'll find there's a difference in the underlying premises in that case. He tells them to their face and that hurts their feelings, right? As opposed, he tells them to their face and it prevents them from wasting their time on a career that will fail. And then maybe each of those, their relevance depends on your definition of nice, right? So if you're nice, it involves caring about the whole person as opposed to caring about their immediate feelings or niceties or etiquette. You might have different, so maybe that's a different definition of nice that needs disambiguation. And then your argument goes, yeah.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is that if you haven't realized initially that nice is ambiguous, you'll just record this nice or great. Like, let's say Paris is great because I think it's the prisoner argument makes a bit better sense there. You'll have recorded it with the disambiguation in Paris, and then you have to realize later on that actually there's a new disambiguation on great that you haven't recorded yet, that you have to record it, but you've broken the link to the original source, so you don't know which one it was in the original source. So you don't know if there's a correlation that, for example, great is always used in this sense in this context and always used in that sense in this context. You cannot observe that because you've lost the track of context.
And so is your concern, Marc-Antoine, that there is not the data structure? Well, so to me, what the problem is in this sense is that by not having a connection, claims to their original context or like from which they are derived or provenance of who posted them, then there's a possibility of running into the danger of arguing about things over and over and over and over again, because links will break essentially, and that will just take up a lot of space and kind of wreck the debate. Or what specifically is the problem besides coming to the incorrect conclusion in the debate by losing track of context?
Well, coming to the incorrect conclusion is bad enough. And if by the way, Stephen were to tell me, one second, that context were to be externalized in a separate domain, I wouldn't mind that much. But I think it's important to say that certain combination of disambiguations exist and others don't. And if you lose track of the context, it may be difficult to establish those a posteriori because certain disambiguations are introduced after the sentence is introduced originally. You discover new disambiguations as time goes by. And being able to go back to the context to disambiguate a sentence that's been only partially disambiguated in one stage is, for me, a use case in terms of mapping the meaning. Now, was the risk for me is losing track of that. Now, I think one problem Tim and Stephen have, and I'd actually return the question to them, is what is their problem? What is your problem with not keeping that information? One problem I can see is you're afraid that it will make a plethora of symbols and context when some of them have the same interpretation, the same disambiguation. And that's a valid point. And there's certainly a
maybe let us
normalization to be
answer rather
accomplished
than
there.
hypothesizing what we would answer.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I have two responses to this. First, it's a strawman argument. I'm not against linking contexts. But the second point is the whole, it cuts to the heart of what we mean by canonical. I mean, the whole point of having a canonical argument map is that it can be interpreted outside of context. That's the main primary goal that we're trying to do. And I am not against, hence the strawman argument, I'm not against linking specific articles within which a claim has been made. That can be to a very ambiguous claim, it can be to a more precise claim. And you can have discussions whether or not that claim accurately represents what is presented in the context. But it comes down to canonicality.
I would add to that, that is by far what I would consider a separate domain, completely outside the canonical debate. It's an add-on layer you can do where you can, and if you like, look at it this way. There's two reasons I'm against it, at least in the core part of the system. One is I see it as being totally unnecessary. You can have that debate. But let's take it from a different direction. Instead of saying, oh, this claim came from that original document. Okay. Let's say that people just on their own decide to discuss that claim, right? You can discuss that claim, and you can discuss lots of different variations of disambiguation. Discuss that claim and get pretty far on the discussion without knowing where it came from. And you can later on come and see that statement in a document and say, oh, now let's have a debate about which one of these claims they meant. And you can attach the one you link the one you think they're talking about later and already have all that debate information there. I don't think it changes the result. The fact that that book has used that phrase and that claim somewhere doesn't change the debate that happened before that, unless it has more information and wants to add later. But that's a separate.
I think adding information is a case I keep coming back to on the one hand.
No, adding information happens in a debate, of course, but it doesn't matter where that information came from, except as evidence, right?
But the other thing I'm kind of vaguely protesting, and I'm not protesting the fact that, okay, maybe this is a separate domain. I do think it's the kind of separate domain that has impact on the model. Like if you hide things in strings, then it's harder to link them to the original intent, but that may be a problem or not. I won't, it's possible that it's a separable domain, and that I'm willing to do. That's not my point. My point is you seem to assume, and this is a difference, you seem to assume that the decontextualized symbol is interpretable without a context, when I'm saying the discussion community is a context. We can hide it, we can refuse to see it, we can play ostrich with it, but it's still a context. They have their own set of interpretations, they have their own worldview, they have their own interpretation of words. It's a context.
Okay, but so the question then is, and I agree, this is an important point. And actually, I don't have an opinion on this yet. This is something that I need to explore more. This is definitely like a to-do on the list. But, I would say if they have different interpretations in different contexts or different groups, then they need separate disambiguations. You need to split that up into separate disambiguation elements so that you could say, I'm talking about this word as used commonly in this group, because you need to be able to introduce other people to, right? So that, to me, that's part of the disambiguation. I agree with that.
Yes.
Right.
And that is a contextualized context. I'm thinking, I'm surprised that there's such a position, because I don't think we're that different, because I do agree that the decontextualized symbol is something we need to talk about. And this is what your strings are, right? They're decontextualized symbol. I'm just saying we need both. And even if those are in a separate domain, fine, I don't care. But we need to be able to correlate the claim to, like, this claim is the disambiguated claim. And I think this is really the discussion we need to have, by the way. There's the, there's this specific claim as in an interpretation sentence pair, and there's the equivalence class of all claims that have this sentence, right? Those are distinct things. And the equivalence class is not modeled in any of our models as such. We're always saying we'll traverse things when they have the same sentence, right? But we have claim here as a specific interpretation, what I call a thought.
Yeah, claim to me is not the sentence.
Yeah.
Sentence are representations.
Claim is a decontextualized symbol, like you just said yourself.
Exactly. Wow.
And I'm saying attaching, well, it's a decontextualized thought for me. It's an interpretation, and it can be attached either to multiple decontextualized sentences, and that's what you have here, and or to multiple contextualized sentences. It can have both, and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, okay, that's a much longer discussion. But if assuming that you have
domain, I mean, if it's a different domain, I would argue it's a separate model that simply links to this one.
Well, the fair, except the way this is done, it's a bit hard to link to things because those sentences don't have identity. And this is why I'm saying, let's cut them out. And this is what I did here. I have a many-to-many relationship between claims and sentences. Sentences are objects. You can have.
Why can't you link to a claim?
What?
Why can't you link to a claim? Why do you want to link to sentences? Why can't you, in a text document, which is what I do, by the way, right now, you link part of the text to a claim?
Fair. Yeah, no, you're right there. You have a point. I'll find the sentence. Cool. Okay.
Isn't that the link? You just say in this source document here on this web page, you have a piece of text which represents this claim in our argument model.
Yeah, it's not what I would do it because it's highly denormalized and it wastes sentences, but it's not invalid.
What do you mean by wasting sentences?
Because if the sentence is in 1,000 claims, it's there 1,000 times.
But the thing with free flowing text, and Jamie can probably represent it as well, it can be a subtext of a sentence that basically, if you write it in claim form, then I don't even see.
No, this is purely a memory consideration. It's not a conceptual consideration.
I think that's a bit premature optimization, especially since memory nowadays is not an issue. It hasn't been an issue for quite a long time. Since the rise of Google, you could say.
Yeah, Google still does memory optimizations.
Anyways, that's not the topic right now.
That's not the topic right now. Fair enough. Okay, yeah, you're right. The symbol in context can point to the claim, and the sentence match can be inferred. You are right about
that's how I'm doing it now. So I'd love to hear any arguments of the.
No, I have no argument against that. It's correct. It's not how I would do it, but it's correct.
I just want to hop on and say, y'all look so cute while you argue. You got such cute little faces. I'm really enjoying it. And I'm so glad I don't have to share my face because I'm still sitting in bed. Hey, Tim, you got a cute face too. It's for the record, recorded now, CDL history.
Okay.
And all y'all have cute faces.
Good morning, Jamie.
Good morning.
I missed the last couple sentences because my daughter's taking a test and I had to make sure she was taking the test.
I think we can conclude for now that it's a valid use case. I think we all see some merit of it, but that it's
It's a separate
postponed,
domain. I've agreed it's a
probably
separate
is a
domain.
separate domain. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had issues about pointing to the sentence, but Stephen pointed out it's not necessary. I can point to the claim and the sentence, precise sentence like can be inferred. I made a point about memory, but it can be totally postponed.
What is the use case we're looking at, by the way?
Symbol in context, being
Yeah.
able to identify.
Paris is nice still.
Like
Okay.
if some author writes Paris is nice in some documents, how the entire document is a context, right? And with that author or whatever.
It's this one really.
You could even like, as Marc-Antoine, as you suggested, do Paris is great if you want. But
Yeah.
I think it doesn't change much in.
But in a way, depending on how you interpret it, because I mean, if you interpret this use case as disambiguation, then we need to talk about how to model different Parises and link multiple different claims with different meanings to each other. That use case still is there as well.
I think Marc-Antoine, I wrote it already in the chat. What Marc-Antoine said is it ambiguation we're talking about or disambiguation? And in only if you ambiguate and like show the different ways something could be interpreted, the context is not needed yet. For
Exactly.
disambiguation, it probably is. Is that correct, Marc-Antoine?
That's what I'm saying. Yes.
Yeah. So maybe we.
I do think that in most cases it's ambiguation that will lead, that it is context that will lead us to ambiguation as well. But yeah.
So I'd say this is about ambiguation. Let's model the ambiguation first and see if we agree.
I'm confused by the terminology. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe we should just write an example indeed.
The ambiguation is about
Making things less.
Identifying the fact that there's an ambiguity and identifying the subcases of the ambiguity. This ambiguation is saying which one is this sentence pointing
ambiguation
to.
is the quality or state of being ambiguous.
I
Yes,
needed a name. I picked that one. I'm open to other names, but
well, I call it disambiguation. That's what's
no, but
the difference. Okay, without the terminology, one is listing all the possibilities, and the other one deciding which possibility it is.
Which is what I prefer to call disambiguation.
What do you prefer to call disambiguation? Hiding the?
No, deciding which one it is. You have listing
exactly.
possibilities, which is step one, and saying, in this case, it's this one. And that's what I call disambiguation.
I think both
well,
could be called disambiguation. I mean, just going from a more generic claim to a more
disambiguation. Yeah, using the Wikipedia use of the term disambiguation is enumerating the possibilities.
The disambiguation page,
making sure that each possibility is separately identified. In other words, for each point of confusion or reuse of a term, there is a separate page, right? In this case, a separate claim.
But the disambiguation page is the one where you pick which page you want. So it is about picking out of the ambiguous.
No, but that's to the reader. You have the disambiguation page for everyone, the one you want. The act of disambiguating is saying, here are all the different possibilities, right? The one you pick is up to you, but disambiguation is the act of identifying. It's the act of removing ambiguity, right?
And for me, listing the ambiguity doesn't remove the ambiguity. It's only when I've decided which one it is that I've removed the ambiguity. It's about identifying.
You can argue one way or the other.
But I'm saying there's two operations, they need two names. I don't mind if we call the first one disambiguation. I can agree to that, but then we need a name for the second.
The second one is picking. Picking is up to the user. It doesn't, there's no, it's not designed in the system. The system doesn't record which one the user chose.
It's
Wikipedia
well, your
doesn't
system
record
doesn't,
which
mine
page you
does.
But I also don't get why
The
one
core
should be called
system.
ambiguation and the other one I mean, for me, both are disambiguation. And
Yeah, but
if anything, ambiguation would be for me going from a more specific one to a more ambiguous one.
More
Correct.
generic.
Yeah.
For
Tim,
me, it's
what you said is not perfectly correct, because like in the argumentation model, it's about what someone said, and then what did they mean when
What do you
they
mean?
said
What
it?
is what someone said? No, that's if there's
That's
a
context,
claim that
that's-
someone meant something. No. That's only if you're making a claim about somebody saying and meaning something, which is a separate claim. It's not in the model. The model is
not
a
in your model.
claim. Okay. Well, there's no meta model for somebody said something in my model. Correct. Right. And you can, in fact, model somebody said something and meant something else using our model, except for the part where you're referring to a claim, right? Which is something we need to get to. But
Okay, because then I
the-
agree with this ambiguation is listing the possibilities like Wikipedia does, because the original or the sentence could have many authors from whatever, like in Wikipedia, and it's not clear what this symbol means, and so we need this ambiguation page.
Rather, there's multiple interpretations of this symbol. That's
Yeah.
it's not about it's not clear. It means there's multiple interpretations.
Yeah.
Because it's canonical.
The reason I wanted to call it ambiguation, though I don't want to insist on that, but just for the record, it's because it's pointing out to an ambiguity that may not be obvious to the reader. So that way it exposes an ambiguity. So
no,
that's
but
why
then
I
you call it ambiguity identification, right? That's
which
what
I'm
it is.
fine with.
It's not. Yeah, ambiguation is creation of an ambiguity, right?
Fair enough, fair enough. And I'm not saying that term was particularly felicitous, but I'm saying identifying an ambiguity, disambiguation. For me, disambiguation is the second step where we go from having identified there's an ambiguity there to resolving it.
But you cannot.
Correct.
Everyone
But the
resolves it
resolving,
differently.
yeah, no. But to me, the resolving is enumerating the
Exactly.
possibilities
That is not
and
what I
making
call
sure you have a
it does not
distinct
resolve anything
claim
for
for
me.
each.
But that is because you, Marc-Antoine, assume context. When Timothy and I talk about a claim, that it's free from context. It's a decontextualized symbol. So it's impossible to resolve it because there's many different contexts, and depending on the context, it will be resolved differently. So the only disambiguation you can do is listing all of them.
And this goes back to the use case I was pointing out. If you have, and the example of Paris is great, right? If you have multiple meanings in Paris and multiple meaning of great, certain will co-occur and others won't. So if you only work with decontextualized, you will have an arbitrary combinatoric on both ambiguities, separate ambiguities.
Which two?
I changed nice to great.
Arbitrary. It's only arbitrary if you decide to put every single possible combination there.
But that's what I'm
That's
saying.
arbitrary. But that's an arbitrary act. But I never said that was the objective.
No, but what I'm
The
saying
objective
is how can you know which ones exist out of the combinatorics unless
it resolves itself through discussion, typically indeed in relevance discussions, because people will say, hey, this is not relevant because, and then typically that implies a more specific interpretation. That's how it commonly goes. And then you need to refine definitions or interpretations, etc.
Yeah, if we had a curator, let's assume the all-powerful central curator. I see that one person's talking about a city and another person's talking about a person, right? I would disambiguate by creating two separate claims and adding the disambiguations or definitions that say, here, this is talking about that city. This is talking about that person. And then I see that there are arguments, and I would move the arguments to their appropriate place. And then I see that there are arguments that don't seem to match in terms of what they think is great, right? And I know that's a vague term, and I'm sure by now there's standards on how, how to define your great or whatever, but I would take varying definitions of great and I would move, in certain cases, I would probably keep copies, right? You know, of is this great here or not? That might get to a general to specific, but at any rate, I would disambiguate by creating more copies of the claim with different definitions attached.
You realize that all those conversations for me are documents, and you've introduced the symbol in context.
What document? No, they're not documents. They're arguments.
Conversations
They're
are
arguments.
documents. Yeah.
There's
There's
no conversation. There's no, I never said conversation.
No, but
Steven said conversation as a description of the process of adding arguments.
yeah. But
Obviously, I'm all for recording arguments, right? But I'm not for recording things that go beyond the argument itself, right? So the other conversational things, hey, good morning, whatever, you know, I don't want that in the system, and I don't want anything else that's conversational, because
I think I see. I think I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What you're saying is the relevance claim is itself an argument, which is something I've been arguing for all around. So I certainly won't contradict it now. And it takes the form of an argument. Fair enough.
Huh? I don't see why you said
what
that
I'm
just
hearing
now.
is this disambiguation, not disambiguation, that's a fraud term right now. This identification of combinations of interpretations that are or are not relevant is itself, it's a meta-argumentation that takes the form of an argument, and we want to model meta-argumentation at some point, so it will find its way into the system.
I think
that
I think I think we need a concrete instance. At least from my perspective, I can say if there's a claim, Paris is great, and somebody says yes because it's a city of love, right? Then someone else can say, hey, that's not relevant because Paris is in the USA. And at that point, you're seeing that because there's ambiguity, the arguments, the supporting and opposing arguments, do not match, and that you need to disambiguate to have a more meaningful discussion there.
But what I'm hearing, what I thought I heard Tim say, which I wanted to jump on, is the whole this is not relevant because, which on the one hand is a process thing, is also an argument, which I'm delighted to hear. It's a great example. We were looking for examples of meta arguments being arguments. That's a good one.
No, yeah, but you know, that is part of the curation process, the process of improving the structure.
But you now admit it's necessary to the what you call the disambiguation process.
No, but disambiguation is also curation, right? I consider disambiguation to be
interesting.
But no, no, okay, but how do I say this? I mean, not necessarily, because let's put it this way. If you remember, we're step one is supposed to be the perfect model without any need for improvement, right?
Yeah, which I never believe in.
And I consider the perfect model without any need for improvement to be something fully disambiguated. Which means I consider disambiguation in terms of having clear definitions for everything as part of step one. Now, step two is, oh, but you didn't do that, and now we need to do it, right? So that's the process of improving it. The same thing of, you know, somebody put in a claim that isn't even a claim, or it's two claims, or it's, you know, just badly worded or whatever. Those are all things that are step two, imperfect data entry that needs to be improved, right? So I do consider disambiguation not as a process, but as definitions, or as an entity that you can put into the system as being a step one thing.
And what I'm saying is this whole being able to put them in. Yeah, can that be pushed to later? I guess. I still don't agree with that, but okay, whatever. I think
Which part don't you agree with?
I mean, I don't believe in this step 1, step 2, because I don't believe in this perfect state
No,
corresponding
step
to
1
anything real.
doesn't exist. Step 1 doesn't actually happen, but you can design a model for it.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
only
I
you
don't
can
see the point
consider
of designing a model for something that will never happen.
the model is where are you trying? Well,
no, it's only about prioritization right now of the use cases. That's the only
exactly.
thing.
It's the
I also
and
agree it
I
will
see
never happen. to
assuming
have
it's
the
just
perfect
like
information.
physics, right? Assuming there's no friction. There's no world where there's no friction. Okay, but it really helps us model the first steps of laws of physics and calculate things, assuming there was no friction, and then we can add in the friction constants or whatever, right? It's the same sort of thing here of what would the map look like if we could do it perfectly immediately, and then what are the mechanisms we need to make it better.
Okay. That's the process we're following now. Okay, so I tried to introduce symbol and context. They're pushed for a separate thing, and that's legit, totally. And that means I'm okay with leaving. It will point to a claim, that's fine. So what's the next step really?
So I think, like, can we narrow down this Paris is great thing? Basically, like, just saying, okay,
yeah, we
treat it as a decontextualized symbol with different interpretations or something.
So
like
the sentence will be in different claims.
Exactly.
And we will know which one we're using because we don't really, but because
we don't. We need to model that. That's, I think, the next modeling step, or not, but it could be.
It could be. Yeah, either we get into, well, it could be modeled without that. I'm not keen on that, but as a devil's advocate.
Without what?
I'm not. I think the next step is modeling entities.
But yeah, but that's what I'm suggesting, basically.
Yeah. But I just, for a devil's advocate argument, I just want to say we don't absolutely have to, because in theory, we could use equivalent sentences to disambiguate, saying like expanding the base sentence into full definitions. I think that's unwieldy. I think it's a bad idea, but for the record, it's an alternative.
It doesn't formalize it indeed, right? So it
Correct.
means that then the user needs to go through the list of sentences to decide whether it's Paris in France or Paris in, okay, got you.
Yeah, it's a theoretical possibility. I think it's inadequate.
Yeah, understood.
And this is where the question of entity formalization.
I actually think we'll get there, because if we model entities, then probably you could automatically like expand the full description of the entities within the claims as basically what you just suggested.
Now, what I think would be more useful is to have, like, in the visual representation, you know, a sentence with hotspots so you can hover and get an expanded definition over each term, but that could be.
That's a use case, and that's why indeed we need to model it.
Yeah,
then we come to the whole discussion on whether or not entities should be claims, and my intuition is still telling me I like it. I've played around with that a lot, whether they should just be like, yeah, well,
that's a fascinating question, and I think we could get really useful. Unfortunately, with 10 minutes before the end.
It depends on Tim's process, right? Because we could model them first as a separate entity, but I've been toying around a lot with considering them claims, definitional claims.
I'm going that way as well, and that's going to be a fascinating conversation. I have claim as entities here, but maybe entities are claims too, and I'm going in that direction. But I'm arguing there's two very fundamental different cases.
I agree.
Oh,
we've seen that in the climate change data, for example.
What are your cases?
Well, it's whether there is actually an instance of there being different interpretations of a definition. This is just where I stand now, though I could be convinced otherwise, because in linguistics, we see the nature of definitions change over time. And those are essentially claims that are put forth. So there's some types of terms that appear like ocean acidification, where the definition of it may not be hotly contested publicly, but climate change obviously is. So for our climate change data, there is a whole debate around what is climate change, like actually disambiguating the definition of the term, while the entities used in the description of the definition may not be contested, and therefore we do not have debates about those. Our curators arbitrarily choose those definitions based on like what's salient, relevant, descriptive of the debate itself. However, I could totally be convinced that all definitions are claims because again, in linguistics, definitions consistently change over time. I see Tim shaking his head, no way. So go ahead, Tim. What are your
No, never, no. Definitions are assumptions. Definitions are the immutable
Claims can
assumptions
also be
that go into-
assumptions.
No, claims are
Claims
debatable.
are assumptions. When you make an
No,
argument,
claims are debatable.
Claims are
No,
statements
you don't
about
assume it. You're
assumptions.
posing it there to be discussed. It's the opposite of assumption. An assumption is something that is not to be discussed. It's an immutable. Oh no, it's a
take an argument.
something.
Take an
Actually-
argument, Timothy. The
Right.
premise, suppose, conclusion. You assume the premise. That's what an argument is. You need to assume the premise.
Then let's change the word. It's not. It's like an axiom.
I want to
um,
reintroduce theme and ream, which I introduced yesterday. I think it's
Well, okay,
totally.
we'll get it. I agree that's important, and I agree that there is. I agree that definitions are debatable in the sense that they need improvement, in the sense that they need to be discussed and understood. I know there's a lot around definitions that make them debatable or require whatever. There's something in there, a process that we haven't even touched about that. But as it relates to disambiguation in claims, definitions are not debatable. You can make a claim that is, this definition is the wrong definition for this claim or something. You can make a claim about that.
But I don't disagree.
Definition
on that,
is not a
Timothy.
claim.
There's two different operations. In one, if you have a claim which uses a definition, indeed, you need to assume the definition. It's equivalent to saying if you have an argument and you're trying to argue against relevance of that argument, you need to assume the premise. You cannot start arguing against relevance of an argument by saying that the premise is wrong. No, then you argue against the premise. So given in a claim,
you can
that has a
use
definition, you need to assume the definition is true. But that is
No, you
dependent
can
on
make
whether or not
completely
the-
unsound arguments. You make an unsound argument. You can make an unsound argument. That's in the structure. You make an argument based on something that's totally false. Okay, you made it. It didn't move the needle, but you can make that, right? So you're not assuming the premise is true. You're connecting a premise that may or may not be sound to a conclusion, right? And then you
I don't think
debate
that's what
about whether or
Steve
not
is
the
saying.
conclusion.
That's not what I
Well-
said, indeed. That's not-
Okay, then I'm not understanding because
We agreed before. There's two ways of arguing against an argument, right? One is arguing against the premise. One is arguing against the logical link between premise and conclusion.
in our current model, the argument.
They're distinct, but when you're arguing on the argument, you kind of don't do both at the same time. When you're arguing on the argument, if you're then arguing against the premise, you're doing a logical disjunction. Of course, you can represent that as a mistake, but it's still a mistake. They're two different operations. You can do both, but they're separate operations, and you have to keep them apart. That's all Stephen is saying.
And the reason you decide whether or not arguing against an argument is relevant, because it's recursive, is by checking whether or not you cannot argue against an argument by saying that the premise is false, because that's irrelevant. If you do that, it's irrelevant. If you say, we need to find a concrete example. Can we go through the use case list maybe?
I will
Okay,
have to
whatever.
leave.
I get what you're saying, and there's semantics to it, and
No, I give this example because it's the exact same with definitions.
okay,
When you
but no,
put a
but
definition in the claim,
what I
like
need to do is
you need to assume that definition is true. Nobody's arguing against that. What we're
okay,
discussing
but
is whether that definition can also separately, out of
Okay.
context within that claim, can be discussed.
what happens to the claim when the definition is false?
That doesn't matter. You assume as part of the claim for a definition to be true, just like you assume as part of an argument that a premise is true.
Can you give an example? Give me an
Of the
example
letter?
of the definition being false.
Folks, I'm leaving for SOAS conference. Maybe I'll see you there. But
I didn't
Okay,
get the link, but I,
have
don't
a
think
hard
that's too much
stop too,
time.
but
Okay.
it's in the.
I'll
it's a
give an
Hangout
example
setting,
in
but-
chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, I have
See
2
you on
minutes.
Friday, Marc-Antoine.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just having trouble visualizing how this plays out
Understand.
because, like I said, I
Understand.
understand that definitions are problematic and we need to be able to.
It has
Fix
to
that,
do with
right.
the team and Reem. Like, in order to focus the discussion, you need to agree on assumptions, and you can certain claim by violating these assumptions. When you do that, you're making an irrelevant argument. That's what you're saying. When you have a claim that assumes a definition, you need to assume the definition. That's true. We align there. It's the same way as when you're arguing
Right.
against an argument, you need to assume the premise.
But I'm not okay. But that doesn't explain why a definition is a premise, is a claim. How is a definition a?
It can be. I'm saying what you're saying doesn't negate either. It's orthogonal to it. You can both support a definition to be a claim, and supporting and opposing arguments to that claim, that definition, and yet still
What is an
assume the definition
argument
to be
to
true
or
and use
for
it in the claim.
against? Wait, what
definition.
are arguments for or against a definition?
Take the climate change example that Jamie gave.
Except that the disambiguation would need to use different definitions of climate change in
Yes.
order for you to get to the bottom of.
Exactly, but you can do that.
Right. So what it's a bit of a circular logic here is what you're saying is when you're arguing for or against a definition, you're essentially saying this is ambiguous. In which case, really, the solution is not to resolve the argument over definitions. It's to break up a claim into multiple versions with different definitions so that you can get to the bottom of what you're trying to get to the bottom
I think
of,
it's
right?
more arguing about what meaningful definitions are, or what definitions are that everyone adopts. More than anything.
But
And I
that's
gave
a
the
claim.
racist example
No,
before.
but the
Sorry,
definition is not a claim. The definition is not a claim then. Climate change is climate change would be no. What the in that case, what you're debating is people should adopt this definition as the term when they mean the word climate change.
Exactly.
But that's
that is
totally
definition as a
different.
claim.
That is not definition as a claim. That's a debate about a word that you think people should adopt and use in some context.
Mhm.
That's totally different from a definition that you've attached to a
I
claim.
know. I'm agreeing with that. I'm
Yeah,
saying
we're
you
saying
can do
Well,
both.
then what you're doing is you're overloading a word for two things, causing confusion, because you're saying that for disambiguation, when we say humans are causing climate change, for disambiguation, you're going to take a claim that is everybody should use climate change as this definition. Then if the answer is no, you're using the same word for two totally different purposes, which is what's causing the confusion here.
Yeah, please don't
Right?
confuse Tim.
Yeah, I'm totally
Oh,
confused
no, you have a hard
because
stop. You're a minute late.
But
We
Jamie,
can
I
do
talk
know,
you,
about
but-
this.
do you understand what I'm implying?
I do, and I mean,
Okay,
I
cool.
agree. It reflects in our data. Like there's some definitions that are debatable.
No, okay,
which
wait.
could be implied as a claim, and some which,
Here's
for
what's
all intents and
important.
purposes, is not necessary to debate. And that is something that we discover by looking at how these terms are actually used in the wild. There's no point like generating a debate about every definition if they're not actually debated in the wild. But in the wild, certain definitions of things, which I mean, if you go on Webster's dictionary, there will be a definition of climate change. However, However, if you look at how people are talking about climate change, there are multiple definitions. And that's why we have a whole debate
Right,
about,
but
well, what
you
is
have a
climate
claim
change?
about climate
Sure.
change as defined by the Webster's dictionary is caused by humans, as opposed to climate change, as I see used on Twitter, is caused by humans. They're totally different claims. They're different claims with different definitions for, and so this is the point is, okay, you can debate about definitions. You can debate about the definition of a word as people use them, but please do not say that the disambiguation you've attached to a claim whose purpose is a definition is a claim, because those are totally different things.
Okay, you may suggest a better term, but the reason
Disambiguation if you want to, but you know.
But it isn't really. It's more like a point you can go to if you don't want to assume the definition. You're definitely not going to assume the claim, right? You're given like an argument about climate change causes blah blah blah, but you don't even agree with the definition. Where do you go to if you don't even agree with the definition? That's
You
when
create
I say,
a new copy with a different definition.
That's one
create
option.
a separate
Done.
disambiguation.
that's one
But
option.
that's the way you do it. That's how you should do it. Otherwise, you get arguments that are opposite relevance depending on that are in the eye of the beholder, right?
Here's
That's
the
one
difference,
option.
That's
though.
the whole problem. It's the same thing as not disambiguating. If you have definitions that people
No,
can't
no.
agree on, it's the same thing as not disambiguating.
That's not true.
Just
because
There are
you need to
different
assume-
Again, the debate to the
Situation.
you need to assume the definition to be true in order to have to discuss the claim definition is used in. We're not disagreeing there. What I'm saying is if you disagree with the definition, you move away from the claim within which the definition is used and you go to the definition claim to discuss the definition. It's an orthogonal operation. But
okay, I disagree with that,
Talk
but
about
we're
this
gonna have to
another
come
time.
back
Tim,
with
you
that
got a
another
hard
time because
stop.
I have to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah,
you
I
gotta
have a
go.
hard
Bye,
stop.
Tim.
Yes.
Don't
Bye.
late. We'll talk about this
Bye.
later.
yeah.
Yes.
And I think I need to write up a concrete example, but I've done it in the past. The concrete racism one I actually thought was quite useful as well, because racism is a very complicated definition.
Absolutely, yeah, so we already have a little bit of this incorporated in debate map already. Like there is a disambiguation feature where you add a definition to something and then you literally there's a box that says disambiguation. So it's like if we're saying particle, we mean this particular particle, or if we're talking about the Paris Climate Agreement, it's this type of Paris, not another type of Paris.
Yeah.
It's really a slot, but then we have a whole debate around, well, what does climate change imply? Catastrophic, immediate, abrupt, like long-term?
How do you model
slow?
that in debate map? I think you've shown me before in the past, because that's basically the discussion we're having. How should we model that, the thing you just said, within our current argument model? Where does
So-
it go? And Timothy will argue for, oh, it's like a new entity, which we call definition, and a definition is a word, and probably a description text. And what I'm saying is a definition is actually just a claim.
Yeah, I mean, for us, like climate change definitions are claims. Like absolutely, like that's in the structure. We have a question that we have our 6 questions of climate change, which encompass all 274 debates. The first question is, what is climate change? Because there's all this argumentation about,
Okay, that's a
what-
definition claim.
yeah, exactly. And then there's all these claims. This is climate change is this, climate change is that, climate
Yeah.
change is this, climate change implies that. And then those individual claim implications of what climate change means carry through the rest of the debate. Because if you think climate change is going to be abrupt, catastrophic, and affecting all climate systems, that's going to have a really big impact about how we talk about the impact of climate change, versus climate change is something that happens all the time and we really don't have a great grasp on how it's going to affect us, and we can't really like imply all this catastrophic damage and blah, blah,
But
blah.
concretely, how do you model this then? So you have your claim in question form, I guess. What is climate change?
Yep, so we have a
Um,
question, what is climate change? And then we have something that we call positions. So the claim that immediately follows a question, we call a position. And usually it's like a composite claims of multiple implications. It's like a package. So like, for example, what is SARS-CoV-2? SARS-CoV-2 is a naturally occurring coronavirus that evolved to infect and cause disease in humans. And then we break up that position because like that position is more than just one claim. It's really composite. So then all of the claims that make up that position, like SARS-CoV-2 is a coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2 naturally evolved, SARS-CoV-2 infects humans, SARS-CoV-2 causes disease. And then there's debates supporting each one of those claims, a part of those positions. And so for climate change, same kind of packages, although we've decided to really disambiguate and argue each individual aspect of it. So what is climate change? Climate change is a media hype hoax. Climate change is an economic scam from the UN. Climate change is, affects all the climate systems. Climate change is long-term change in weather that lasts more than a few decades. So all these various definitions that have slightly different implications.
But so you list each of these as a separate position, but can
Yes.
you, yeah, it comes down to curate. I see that this makes perfect sense in terms of a curated system, but then the question is, what do you do if somebody disagrees with that position? It's what you're doing is a bit like Tim says, then you create a new definition, a new claim. I think when I say that the definition is a claim, then I'm saying more, while people can add opposing definitions or opposing reasons for liking definitions as opposing arguments to that position. Whereas you don't do that, right? You just bundle a whole position that's basically only supporting arguments. There's no opposing information there.
Not at that level, not at the position level, because what we found is that like we have argumentation and claim levels to the debate map. But at the position level, it's more than just like a binary dialectic. So there's all of these shades of gray, of like slight differences of perception. And this is because, we're essentially reporting on what we see in the wild. And so, yeah, we don't have like pro con in the position level. We only get down to pro con when we're at the argumentation layer, which is underneath the positions.
I have an idea because everyone needs to go. Could you maybe present this again during next meeting as like a brainstorm inspiration thing when we pick up this discussion again? Because I think it's highly relevant the way you do that right now. And I know Timothy is more acquainted with this, but for the rest of us.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Is the next meeting on Friday?
Friday is Marc-Antoine's session, so I don't know if that fits well, but like
Okay.
Tuesday, I think is a good time.
Next Tuesday, let me check my calendar.
Yeah, I'm also not certain about Friday.
Okay, Tuesday should work. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Then see you on Friday and Tuesday and Wednesday and all the other days.
All right. I'll see your cute little faces later.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.